everybody has a relationship with everybody else in the colony. You roll a victim, you roll a criminal or a murderer, and there's a connection there that you can exploit anyway.
Right.
And but it also doesn't matter who's killing who, because you have to find out that someone is making them do it.
Welcome to Tabletop Talk, where I interview creatives in the tabletop gaming space and dig into their creative process and inspirations. My passion is understanding who they are and why they create. Enjoy this interview with Emily Weiss, the creator of two Mothership resources, Picket Tango and Breach of Contract. We talk about how her love of reading books and telling stories led to her playing RPGs, why she found D&D didn't support the type of play she loved, and the game she found that did. And lastly, we talk about horror movies. Okay, please sit back, relax, read the small print, and enjoy my time with Emily.
Hello, my name is Sam Dunawalt, and when I'm not breaking down game mechanics on the Dice Exploder podcast, you better believe I'm listening to Tabletop Talk.
Howdy friends, Craig here. Today, my guest is Emily Weiss. Emily is a writer, game designer, and a real-world public defense attorney who uses her harrowing experiences with the criminal justice system to inform her sci-fi horror writing. She wrote one of the articles in the Great Hull Breach anthology for Mothership. She also created the award-winning adventure Picket Tango. Emily, welcome to the third floor.
Hi, it's great to be here.
So I've got all kinds of questions, but unfortunately I have to ask you the mandatory question for every podcast, right? Which is, how did you find gaming? And I want to frame it a little bit differently if we could. At some point, you knew nothing about this hobby. You knew nothing about books that told you how to make characters, that told you how to roll dice and pretend to be somebody else. When was the first time it was put in front of you? Can we go back there?
So I guess I kind of have two answers to that.
Okay. Let's do it chronologically. How does that sound?
Chronologically, like informally, I was homeschooled. I have a sister. She's just under a year younger than me. And we were very close, obviously, growing up. So we would just go outside and just make up characters and make up stories. We weren't rolling dice or anything. We were like, this is my Pokemon trainer and this is their Pokemon team, and we're gonna fight the bad guys. Like, that's what we did when we were kids. And so I got into like forum role playing and stuff like that, like posting.
Okay. Can
stories.
You explain that a little bit to me. So what exactly do we mean by forum role playing?
You make up a character on a message board and you come up with their personality and everything. They don't have stats or anything like that.
Right.
But you talk to other people on that message board who have also made characters, and you like create a plot with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go, okay, so now we're going to play it out. So then you just post messages on a board.
That's
and
cool.
you post like my character's perspective and they post their character's perspective, and you kind of go from there. So that was a lot of my teen years staying inside.
So let's pause real quick here, Emily, because this is super interesting, because obviously those two things you just told me about are very tied to each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, they're very similar. Now, being older and being well into a hobby that kind of formalizes what you were doing, when you were younger with your sister and in your teen years on these forums, do you have a sense of what was happening back then in your mind? Like, what do you think drew you? There's all kinds of ways you could have played with your sister, right? But this is what you chose. And there's a lot of things to do on the internet.
Yep.
But you were drawn to this. Do you have a sense now, looking back, why?
Well, I always liked stories. I was obviously didn't have many friends, stayed inside, read voraciously.
Yeah.
Wanted to be an author kind of out the gate. Wanted to be a writer. So that storytelling thing was something I always wanted to do, and something that kind of grew from that, like teenage OCs thing.
So here's an interesting egg and chicken question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So is it your love of storytelling that you think that drew you to the reading, which led to this and you wanting to be an author? Or was it you discovering books and the stories in the books that kind of gave birth to that storytelling love? Does that make sense?
I think so. I think it was the storytelling part of it. itself, before I could read, my father, my grandfather would both tell me stories like when I was going to sleep. That's how we would go to sleep.
Yep.
And that power, they both are very good storytellers, was really attractive to me. I wanted to have that ability. I wanted to not just experience the stories they were telling me, but tell my own.
Right.
And have people listen to me like I listen to them. I'm a little bit of a narcissist.
Well, but it's cool because you recognize that there was a power to what they were doing, right? And, you know, that power is expressed in the impact that it had on you. And, you know, everybody who's a reader knows, like, man, there's few things more powerful than a damn good book. It can just knock you for a loop. It has power in itself. All right. So that gets us to Emily through her teen years. We're doing kind of this forum informal LARPing.
Yep. Essentially, yes.
Thing, right? What's next?
So I didn't really do that for quite some time. I decided I want to be a lawyer pretty soon after I was like 17. I was like, I want to be an attorney because I want to be an author. Authors don't make any money. Lawyers make money. So I should do that. And so I was very focused on getting to law school. All I did was study and go to school. I graduated college and I just moved in with my sister to go to law school. And my sister had discovered this new thing called Critical Role. And I was like, okay, this is weird. And we watched it together and I was like, oh, I need to do this.
Why? What did you see that told you that got its hook into you immediately?
It was the marriage of game plus story.
Right.
That I just really loved. I've played video games for like my whole life. I've played like board games. I was really into things like that. And so I'd heard of D&D before, but I hadn't ever seen it done. And obviously I didn't know anybody who had done it before. So seeing it in that accessible way, it was just like, oh, I have to do it. So then our mutual friend of ours, we kind of roped in to play with us. We found someone who would DM for us and we played Pathfinder.
Oh, wow. You went hardcore. You went in hard.
Well, because we didn't know what we were doing.
Sure.
We didn't have any of the books. We didn't buy any starter sets. We were just like, who knows how to do this? The one person we knew how to do this had only played Pathfinder. So we're like, okay. We had like a mat that we could like mark a grid out on. And we found like, I think we went to like a dollar store and found like a bunch of like army men for our minis.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was the first time I played like a elf girl who could like turn into a wolf, I think. I don't really remember. She was like a druid or something.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, your sister was the gateway in some ways, right? She gave you the first sample for free and it kind of got you into Critical Role. And you may not know the answer to this. I imagine you might, though. Let's do a little parallel origin story, right? Because she was playing with you as a kid. Do we have a sense of whether she was being drawn to this as well? Like, what did her path end up being that ended up reconnecting you on this story level?
So she was still in college when I went to live with her. We've kind of joked about this. If she's the left brain, I'm the right brain, or vice versa, whichever one works. She went into a math field. So she was doing a bunch of science, STEM stuff. For her, I think it is more of a like a way to blow off steam. And it was for me too. But it also is I'm more connected to the storytelling part of it than I think she is. She's less interested in that. She's more just like, oh, we're goofing around with my friends. And I'm like, yeah.
Right. So your first real exposure to the play aspect of this is Critical Role, which is a hell of a bar, right?
Yes.
And then you sit down and you play Pathfinder for the first time. and Matt Mercer is not your GM or your
Exactly.
DM, right?
He in fact was not.
When you walked away from that first session, how did it feel?
So it wasn't everything I expected it to be.
Yeah.
But I did really love doing it. I think we played that first session. It was like absurd how long we played for. Of course, I was like 22 and could stay up until 2 a.m. and didn't care.
And was still functional in the morning.
Right. And I could still go to school and all that stuff.
Right.
But I was like, wow, I can, and there's so many options and I can do all these like special little moves. And it's like I can win a game. And I can also tell this RP story that it seems like everyone cares about me. Yeah, that first session. I was really bitten by the bug. As time went on, I played a few more games of that in-person game. Turns out scheduling people in real life is really difficult. And so we only played like a few sessions of it. So I started, but I still really wanted to play a game. So I looked online. I found some online games through Roll20. I got super lucky because I looked for a few games. And the first game I found was actually the game where I met my very good friend, Ian Newsom.
Okay. Friend of the show.
Yep. Friend of the show, Ian. That's how I met him, was like the very first.
So you just randomly got into a game with Ian.
Yep. Exactly.
That's kind of cool.
The rest, as they say, is history.
Safe to say a Mothership game?
No, it was 5e.
Ian's got a dirty secret that he played 5e.
And I mean, we didn't know any other games, though.
Right.
That's what we were. We were like, this is the game that you play.
Right. Yeah. And for all intents and purposes, it basically is. Right. If there's any one thing that's synonymous with role playing, it is D&D. Copy machine Xerox. Right. That's just that's how it is.
Kleenex.
So did you connect with Ian and is that just we played together, or did you realize that you has a shared interest? Like, did your friendship extend beyond the table?
Yes. It didn't take very long either. I think we were only in the game for like a few months, playing like weekly. And then it turned out that we had a lot of similar interests in like video games and movies and stuff. We have very similar thinking styles.
How so?
We're both very analytical people. We're both we have very high standards for things.
That's interesting.
I just think that we understand each other's viewpoints a lot.
Yep.
And when we differ, it's really interesting to have discussions about why. And I was
because of the big overlap, right? So it becomes an interesting conversation.
Exactly.
But you're coming from the same place. Yeah. That's super cool.
And we're both very argumentative people. So when we argued, it was fun. Like, I find that fun. And I don't know if he does find it fun, but like like we'll argue with each other, but similar to the way when I would argue with my sister, if we had an argument, it was never emotional or personal.
Right.
So if we disagreed, we would just move on. So it's similar to that, where most of the time when we're arguing a position, we're not fighting. So that's another thing that we share, is that when we can be really combative, it's not emotional. It's kind of like part of whatever we're doing.
Well, it's working through something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the problems in the middle of the ring. You're not necessarily in opposite corners, but you're beating the shit out of it and trying to figure out, what's going on there. So you go from Pathfinder to D&D. Was there any sense for you that like this is a different system and that matters, or was it still basically the same game for you?
I appreciated 5e a lot more because it seemed a lot less finicky. Yep. Pathfinder has a lot of character customization, which I like a lot about Pathfinder, But the problem with it is you basically have to plan your whole character out from day one.
Sure.
And pick all the feats you're going to pick and put them on a list somewhere because you're going to forget which one you take. And you can't do that cool thing until like level 12. And I hope that you remembered what it was you wanted to do because it's going to be a bit. And 5e was more like you just jump in. You have some stuff to do right now. You don't have like 500 prerequisites. If you change your mind, you can do something different. And if the game goes in a different direction and your character has something happen to them, you can more organically change like what you wanted to do.
So what was the next big game for you, Emily? So we've got Pathfinder, we've got D&D. What was the next game that made you go, oh, this is interesting?
This is, I think it was Troika.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
Yeah, that's a long time ago.
And how did you find Troika?
Ian and I were both playing D&D together. We played together for like 2.5 years, something like that. And we were both kind of getting tired of it. I guess not getting tired of it, but
why?
It's just very samey eventually. You go in, you have a character moment, you have a conversation with someone, you go into a room and you fight some guys, and then you find some treasure in that room, and then you maybe have a conversation about what the treasure is, and you go into another room and you fight some more guys. And it's just kind of the same. And we were running into this problem where we were fighting kind of against the design of these things, where we would have a good idea for avoiding something or for like shortcutting something, but the game wouldn't let you think outside the box. Like you had to do
it wouldn't incentivize it, right?
Right.
I mean, when you look at what the incentives are built into the DNA of that game, it's combat.
Right.
You know, so yeah, I totally get that. And people say, well, you can do anything in D&D. And it's like, yes, you can. I'll show you the 10 pages that are everything you're talking about. And then we'll go look at the 55 pages on combat. And you tell me what the game's built for. Not a criticism.
Yeah.
That's what the game is.
And it is kind of hard on the person who's running it.
Yes.
If they don't have any resources for your players came up with a good idea. And so all my races are for the 5 guys they fight. So I guess I just come up with a reason for why they fight the 5 guys, because otherwise we're done. We've been here for 15 minutes.
Well, I've got 30 minutes of prep to handle your right turn. Yeah,
exactly. So I get it. It's just we were frustrated.
Yeah.
So he started looking for different games to play. And at that point, I was in my 3rd year of law school. So I did not have a ton of time to just be like reading stuff for fun. Also law school, I get called out on this with my colleagues a lot. Because when I talk to people who are thinking about going to law school, they're always like, talk to Emily. She will try and talk you out of going. It killed fun reading for me. Like I couldn't read for fun anymore.
Yeah, it's your job.
And I did so much of it. It was just I would come home and like I can't read anymore. It physically doesn't happen. So he was like, this one's really easy to read. It's weird. And you don't need to spend an hour making a character. You roll 2 dice and you have a character. And I was like, sign me up. So we played Troika. I don't exactly remember the first game we played of that, but I remember playing it and being like, oh my gosh, I love this. I don't have to come up with a huge backstory. I also don't have to be really precious about my character.
Right.
Because I can just get another one like so cool, like so quickly. And even though a bunch of stuff is filled in a background, I can very easily take that as like a jumping off point, as like a prompt. So Troika was awesome. Yeah.
Troika's a great game.
Troika's awesome.
The setting is just crazy as shit. And the game is easy to play. And it has what I like, which is it gives you just enough to start. Right. But it doesn't fill in all the squares for you. Fills in a couple squares, and then draws the rest of the grid, but you get to fill in the rest, which is nice. All right. So the obvious thing I need to know then is when when do you and Ian find Mothership? Do you find it together? Do you find it first? Does he find it first? Does someone drag someone in? When does Mothership become a thing?
So he found it first.
Okay.
He found it, and I can't really remember the exact circumstances of this, but I was working, and I came home one day and he called me and he was like, I just played the best session of anything I've ever played. And I was like, oh,
do tell.
At this point, we played a lot. So
right.
I was like, please tell me. And he told me about Mothership.
And what did he say about it? You remember?
He said it was, I don't remember specifics of it, but he was like, that was the coolest game experience I'd ever had, because he'd never played a horror game before, and he never played a sci-fi game before.
Wow.
And neither had I, but I was more of the sci-fi person in our friendship. Like, I'm the Star Trek nerd. I'm the Farscape nerd. He's not.
Farscape, nice.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, sci-fi, and you liked it? Interesting. And I was like instantly drawn to it because horror and sci-fi are things that I love. And so I don't exactly remember the first time I played it, but I remember playing it and going, yes.
So
this is perfect.
Yeah. So question for you, again, similar to what I asked before, which is, now you are very familiar with the game you created for the game, right?
Yes.
Again, looking back, what do you think was happening there, not only to Ian, but more importantly to you? Like, what was different? You didn't create anything for Troika. You didn't create anything for 5e, right? So what was different about Mothership?
So Mothership was easier to create for than those two. We did work together. Ian and I worked together on a couple of things for like 5e and stuff, but we never published them.
Yeah.
Mostly because there's a lot of stuff going on, at least in 5e, that is just difficult to develop for, at least in my experience. And I'm someone who has extremely limited time to do things like this. And I just didn't have the time or the bandwidth to do it. Mothership was a lot easier to develop for, both because you don't have to think so much about the game, at least in my experience. And it's also, you present a situation instead of solutions to situations. You don't have to think up solutions.
Right.
Players can think those up.
Yep.
So that's what made it easier to develop for Mothership. I also kind of saw a gaping hole in Mothership that I wanted to fill, which was there's no murder mysteries for it. So
which I really want to dive into. Yeah. But before we close out on this part, though, is that so? You talked about, you and Ian worked on stuff for 5e, and obviously Ian and you have created things together in Hull Breach and have worked together. But those you pushed, right? Those you pushed to publish. What I want to know is, it sounds to me like you had this desire to create more than just for the table, right? Like, we all create when we play role-playing games. Everybody's a game designer when they're sitting down and playing role-playing games to a certain degree, right?
Right.
But we're talking about creating and then sending that ship out for other people to sail. What do you think that drive is? You had that drive for 5e, but it never quite worked out. Mothership turned out to be the perfect ship to do that with. Where's that coming from?
This is going to sound shallow, but I'm really kind of like a narcissist. Like, I'm not. I do really like people paying attention to me.
Yeah.
That is kind of part of it. But also I wanted to make something that I wanted to play really badly, and I never saw ever. Yeah. And if I did find it and did want to run it, I would always read it and be like, this seems so hard to do. And I do not think I can find people who can play this with me and who will buy in.
Yep.
Because you need really high player buy-in for stuff like that.
Yep.
In my experience. And I just wanted to write something that I wanted to exist, because It's so thin on the ground, man. I'm jonesing for it so bad.
Well, so that's great, right? So it sounds like a bit of a perfect storm, which is you like people to like the stuff you make. Nothing wrong with that.
Yep.
I don't know if that makes you a narcissist necessarily, but I've got a freaking podcast because I like people to hear what I have to say, right? So I guess that makes me one too.
I understand completely.
You find a system that doesn't get in your way, that focuses on genres that you enjoy, and you find a hole, a gap, and you say, you know what? Like, I want to play in that gap and no one's doing it, so I jump into it. I think that's pretty cool.
Exactly. Another part of it was, I don't scare very easily. I really like horror movies and stuff. And obviously, like, jump scares will startle me.
Right.
But I haven't ever really been scared by a piece of media until I watched a movie called Cure by, I think his name is Kiyoshi Kurosawa, I think is his name, is the director. It's like in the 90s. It's this movie where people start committing murders of people that they love, people that they care about, and they don't know why. Like that
movie's
officer,
fucked up.
Yeah. It's so scary.
Yes.
It's so scary.
Yeah.
And so I think we were talking once and we were just talking about things that scared me. And I was like, nothing's really scared me except for that movie. So then
The Cure is on my list of movies that I loved watching.
Mm-hmm.
It is, I think, incredibly disturbing, if not scary, right? I don't think I want to watch it again. That's
entirely fair. I'm not sure I do either.
Yeah, and that's a compliment, I think, ultimately, right? There's a very small handful of movies that I will say, these were good, important movies, and I don't need to see it again. Hereditary is the most recent version of that.
Yep.
I think that's a phenomenal horror film. Phenomenal horror film. I will never watch it again. I will recommend it to people. I will give them warnings. I think it's an excellent, excellent movie. I don't need to see it again. Another one, Babadook. Don't need to see that one again either. Yep. Loved it. Great movie. Don't need to sit through it again.
That's so funny. Mine's like Martyrs.
Jeez. Yeah.
And Antichrist, like those.
Ooh, look at you. Yeah.
But I mean, Cure really inspired me because that was like the first thing that scared me in a really long time, maybe ever. And so that kind of was the genesis of Picket Line as the mystery part of that.
That's cool. That's cool. So it's like, Emily, it's like you have a sheet in front of you with an outline. That's a perfect transition. So guys, we're going to take a quick break. Of course, the Insider Insight series allows me to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and the methods for crafting their creations. We have got a lot to talk about with Emily on the other side of the break. We're going to talk about what she foreshadowed as a great writer, the Picket Line Tango. We'll be right back.
Hello, my name is Sam Dunewald, and I'm here to tell you about Dice Exploder, my tabletop RPG design podcast where each week I take a single game mechanic and break it down with a friend. Come listen to me talk to Alex Roberts about love and pity, John Harper about elegance and layout, and Mikey Ham about, what else? Exploding dice! It's Dice Exploder, breaking down RPG design one mechanic at a time. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
So Ian reached out to me. He's like, Ian's just good people. He was great on the show. The Hull Breach is freaking amazing. He has just collected this unbelievable group of talent and published, I think, a very important anthology for Mothership. He's just a good egg, right? And he just touched base with me. He says, "Hey, Craig, don't really have any reason for me to come back on the show, but I think you need to talk to him." I'm like, and honestly, that's all I need, right? I didn't need to know anything else. If Ian says I need to talk to you, then I need to talk to you because Ian understands the show. Ian understands what I try to do here. So being awesome, he sent me Picket Line Tango. And It's not what I expected in a very, very good way. So I'm going to read the blurb off the site, and then I've got tons of questions, and I want to dive into them with you. The one thing I will tell you, for those of you that are listening, if you plan on playing Picket Line Tango, we're going to try to keep it as spoiler free as possible, but there is a possibility as I get nosy and diggy that I might reveal a few things. So just know that as we dive into this. But here's the blurb. The people of mining colony Norton Outpost are addicted to murder. Kith slaughter kin over petty conflicts and bad habits. A union strike raises tensions to a boiling point. The true killer stalks unseen among protest signs and workers on the edge of chaos. This is a noir-inspired murder mystery adventure in space for the Mothership sci-fi horror RPG first edition. It has everything you need for night after night of thrills, suspense, and economic horror. And it was that last little bit that is super freaking interesting. So I wanted to roll back a little bit. We know that there's this hole. You've got this desire for a murder mystery. You watch this movie that has an impact on you. If I were to force you to go to the day before the acorn dropped on Picket Line Tango, what's happening on that day? So what is just the very, very beginnings before you start going, I think I want to make something? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh gosh, this is a while ago now. I have to think.
Honestly, that is the hardest part about this podcast is I talk to creators and I'm talking about shit they've been working on like years ago. So yeah, I just got it, but like you're working on other shit now. But anyway, so you gotta work with me though.
I think part of it was Ian was working on The Drain, which was his first scene. And we had worked on stuff together. I think he was kind of like not pushing me, but going like, hey, you should maybe, like, are you thinking about maybe writing something? Like, think about it. Just think about it. I don't know if this was the day before, but we'd played a game together called Red Strings Club as well. And I think that was a bit before we watched the movie Cure. But Red Strings Club, if you're not familiar, is basically a game where you're a bartender in the future. And you are kind of like a spy. You're kind of trying to get information from your clientele. And you have the ability to add things to the drinks, essentially, to change their mood, to change what they tell you in their conversations. So it's kind of like a visual novel. You have a little bit of extra stuff you can do. So I played that game. And spoilers for the Red Strings Club, if you haven't played it, you eventually find out that your character is, I believe, not human. Like, I believe you are an android. And there's a kind of a subplot with this company that's going to make this implant that takes negative emotions out of people's heads, so everyone's happy all the time. And so you're trying to stop that. So I kind of got these two pieces of media were like smushed together in front of me. I also have always been just a huge murder mystery fan, period.
Why is that?
I love the narrative a murder mystery has. When I was growing up, I watched a ton of true crime. Probably the reason why I'm a public defense attorney now.
Wow.
Is because I really like the story of it. That sounds a little callous, but it is true.
No.
That I like the story of a crime.
All right, so I've got to ask a question. I warned you before the podcast that I've got left field questions. Here's one for you. All right, so now I'm talking to somebody who is a true crime fanatic who really sees the narrative of true crime and that draws you to law, right? If someone were to tell me this story and then say, well, of course she became a prosecutor, I'd be like, well, yeah, every true crime fan would become a prosecutor. That's not what you did. So I've got to pause here for a second to understand what the hell happened.
So I don't know if I'd call myself a true crime fanatic. I definitely was when I was a child.
Okay.
That scared my mother a lot.
I bet. Can't we just read Velveteen Rabbit?
Please change channel. I don't want to hear about Ted Bundy for the 45th time and how he's the most evil man who ever lived. Emily, we all know about Ted Bundy.
We got to do your multiplication tables.
Please. So exactly. But what I really craved was that story. So I eventually got into like Agatha Christie and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And I read a lot of just like random murder mystery books because I didn't care so much about real life. I cared about like figuring out a puzzle. I really love the puzzle part of it. I'm like a game person. I'm a puzzle person. And so if you put a puzzle in front of me, I really want to solve it.
Yeah.
The defense part of it is interesting because my father has actually been also involved in the legal field. He was a judge for decades.
Oh, wow.
And he always actually told my sister she would make a good attorney. And so not ever being told that, I was like, I'll show you.
Yeah, screw you, Dad.
But he would always say that the defense attorneys were the smartest people that he ever saw.
Did he ever explain why he thought that?
He did, but it didn't really make sense. It only really made sense when I became a defense attorney, which is essentially when you're a public defender, you have very little you have control over, because there are many decisions that you just cannot make. You can't make a decision on whether, like, what your client is charged with. You can't make a decision on what the law is.
Right.
You can't make a decision on whether or not you go to trial. That's the client's decision. And you can't make a decision on whether or not that person testifies at their trial.
Yeah.
So often you get situations where people who are confronted with something that they've allegedly done don't listen to you and your advice and take things to trial that probably shouldn't go to trial.
Yeah.
And we cannot stop that. That's their right. You have a right to go to trial. And so often you'll get in essentially no-win situations. But you have to say something. You have to make some sort of argument to human beings. So both they don't laugh at you and you also don't laugh at yourself.
Yeah.
So defense attorneys are really good at coming up with novel solutions to problems.
Interesting.
And different ways of looking at situations, different perspectives, different ways to interpret actions, laws, and how those things apply to one another. And you have to be really good at thinking on your feet because often I've done a lot of jury trials and often I don't have a case until someone testifies and I get to cross-examine them. And in that cross-examination, I get a case. You get
smell
a point.
The blood. Yeah.
I can say that in a closing. I can make an argument with that. But often I'll just go in and I don't have anything.
Wow.
So that's what he meant, is that defense attorneys have to be in that position often. Prosecutors are not. Prosecutors have all the power. They choose
so much discretion.
They choose what to charge. They choose who to charge. They choose what to take to trial. They choose what plea offer to make. They have the power.
Interesting.
And I was thinking about this the other day. I come from a family of contrarians. I thought I was like the one person who wasn't contrarian, but that's not true. Like I am too. And I've always been politically on the side of people who are less advantaged, who are kind of under the boot of a system. And before I became a public defender, that is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be useful to people in that way.
Yep.
And now that I'm in it, I mean, you get disabused of a lot of like lofty notions if you're a public defense attorney for any amount of time. But it's kind of like you have to, again, change your perspective on what you're doing. My boss, love my boss. He's really good at managing our own expectations because it's hard to go in and lose like a lot. You lose a lot. You lose almost all the time. But again, perspective is important. There's a constitutional right to due process of law.
Yep.
But that's not the same thing as justice.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is give you due process of law. A bonus is if it's just.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I try to do, is be good at processing a case, but also be good at helping justice to happen if it's possible.
Yeah.
It's not always possible.
I bet.
And it sucks when it's not, but you have to, again, your job in the Constitution is not about justice all the time. Which
No.
sucks.
Well, it's a system, right? It's a system, and the role you're playing is a critical part of that system.
A critical role.
Without nice,
so
well, nice tie-in.
funny.
You should have a podcast. You should write. It's something, and God, like this literally could turn into a 7-hour interview, and I'm not going to do that to you because I thought I wanted to be a lawyer my whole life.
Oh.
And built my undergraduate degree around going to law school, and decided that summer after graduating from undergrad that that's not what I wanted to do.
Honestly, good for you.
Well, that's why it's like I talked to you, right?
I'm proud of you.
and
that's the best time to understand it.
Well, and what was interesting is, and this is why this is, like I said, I could turn this into a 7-hour interview. What's interesting for me, the big everything you just talked about is what drove me, because I wanted to be a defense attorney. That's what I wanted to do. And he's a shithead now, but one of the people that I loved was Dershowitz, reading Dershowitz and stuff like that. And Dershowitz thinking before he became a shithead on, you know, what the role of a defense attorney is and how that fits into the system and how critical it is to the process of gleaning the truth from it. And with my big revelation, Emily, is I was like, I believe this in my soul, but that doesn't mean I'm the one that has to do it.
Right.
And that was the big revelation, is that I did not think I could be you. I don't think I could survive it. So I admire the shit out of you, and I'm glad you're doing it. But that's what was the big revelation. But that's not what we're talking about. But that's like literally I could start a second podcast, just you and I talk. All right. So that was a beautiful right turn, though. Thanks for walking with me.
No problem.
You now have all of these things, this gap to fill. What were the first, if we imagine Lego pieces everywhere that end up coming together to be Picket Line Tango, what were the first couple pieces that you pieced together and realized, wait, I got something going on here?
So I wanted to do originally a pamphlet because that seemed easy to do. That seemed quick. That was around, if I have my dates right, that was around when I started working at this office. And I was like brand new as an attorney. So I was like learning how to do everything. I didn't have much bandwidth. I didn't have much time. I was like, pamphlet, we can do that. That's 2 pages. That's like what, like 1,000 words? No problem, man. So what I wanted to do originally was I had the idea for the murderer being an android bartender who thought that the best way to take care of the people in this colony that he had been listening to for years was to get rid of the little complaints they would come and complain to him about all the time. And so I was like, okay, I needed some NPCs, which I'm pretty good at making. And I would have a system where you could randomly generate a crime, and it would give you a clue or something, and you could just roll some dice and you would have a murder. And you could just be like, okay, players, here's this brand new murder. And it wouldn't have to be a very complicated plot structure of like Madame DeBlaine in a mansion, and she has like an affair with the cabin boy and all this like drawn out stuff that we have to remember. No, everybody has a relationship with everybody else in the colony. You roll a victim, you roll a criminal or a murderer, and there's a connection there that you can exploit anyway.
Right.
And it also doesn't matter who's killing who, because you have to find out that someone is making them do it. So,
oh, nice.
I was like, that can fit in 2 pages.
Yeah, that's a bunch of tables, a couple prompts,
yeah,
right?
I was like, we can have a map and we can have a table of 10 people and that'll work. And I started writing that and found that isn't going to work that
Why?
great. It's too implied.
How so?
There's when you're writing people who have those established relationships with each other, you can't just give them one bullet point and say, like, this is how they feel about everybody else. You need a lot more information for people who are running it to be able to see that relationship between those 2 people.
Is that because all 10 people have 9 relationships? So suddenly that becomes 90 relationships?
Yes. And I was like, oh, that's not going to work.
Yep.
So I needed to change it to be a little bit longer, just so we had an idea of what these locations were, what these people were, and like what this community was. I was trying to make sort of a locked door mystery. And I was like, a colony in a bubble. That's like that. And it is, but it isn't, because the locked door is the community. So I needed to flesh that community out a little bit more.
Right.
Yeah. So it got bigger.
Well, so I want to know, when you jumped over that ravine, though, right? When you, like, where were you in the pamphlet process where you said, oh, shit, this is not going to be a trifold. This is going to be something. This is going to be a zine. This is going to be more. Like, what was the breaking point that made you realize, okay, it's not going to be that?
It was, I think I read it a few times and I hadn't run it yet, but I was looking a lot at that one blog post by the Alexandrian about the free clue rule. Because I was trying to write a murder mystery so I could figure out how to do it. Because I just want more of them to exist. So I was like, why don't they exist? Come on. So I was trying to write 3 clues for every murder. And then I was like, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
So what about 3 clues for every person? Okay. And then 3 clues for every location. Okay, this is getting to be a bit more. And then I don't see how the location clues actually help us figure out who the murderer is, because they're not very connected. And it just, I don't think there was like a tipping point or something to jump. But eventually it got to the point where the amount of content that I had written is not a pamphlet.
Right.
And the amount of content that I had written was not cohesive enough either. It needed like an extra thing. And the whole time I had already said I needed like an inciting incident to get them there.
Right.
And I was like, okay, well, if it's a colony, that's a mining colony, and they need a reason to be there. Let's have the colony be on strike because a major section of their workforce is dead. And so they're sent there by the company to deal with the strike. And so I already had that in the background, but I had not fleshed it out at all, because I was just like, they'll be there. There's a murder. Of course, everyone wants to solve a murder like as soon as they get there.
Sure. That's your perspective, right?
They're gonna ignore the strike, obviously. And I think Ian read it once and he was like, why are you not doing anything with this strike at all? Like, what? Why not? So I was like, oh, okay. That can be the thing behind the murder that ties everything together. Because yeah, it wasn't as cohesive. It needed more backbone, and that was the backbone that it was missing.
So you go from, I can just, I'm busy as hell. I can come up with 1,000 words, to, oh shit. Right. And it sounds to me like this thing had gotten to the point where you couldn't just drop it. Right. That you're like, all right, I've got to keep pulling at this thread. I got to keep doing this. Was that exciting or disheartening?
Both, because I'd spent a lot of time on that. Maybe not like if I had sat down for 3 days, I probably would have done it if that's all I did. But that's not what I did, because I had a 40-hour plus work week to do.
Yeah.
And when you get done public defendering for 8+ hours, you come home, your best writing is not going to happen. So I spent, I think, maybe 2 to 3 months on this draft at this point. And I got to that and I was like, oh, there's so much more of this mountain to climb. Okay. Are we going to climb it? And credit to Ian, because he's, as you said, he's a really good egg. He was like, no, you have to do it. He's like, you got it. So it's like, oh, okay, I guess I'm doing this.
So I want to stop at that moment though, Emily. So now what do you do? Right. So now you have to throw out a lot of what you've done, keep it in a different form, re-sculpt it. Like, I'm imagining you sitting back at the laptop after making that decision. What do you do now?
I think that something that I really appreciate about myself is that I will sometimes get really emotionally attached to things.
Yeah.
But if I do, I can pretty quickly tell when that's happening. And then if I can tell, I can like cut it off. So I was just like, okay, I can't be emotionally attached to my perfect little pamphlet idea. And so that's fine. Let's run with this different thing. And also, when I started to think about the fleshing out of the area, I was like, okay, this is great, actually. I did want to do more stuff about the outpost and the people there, and kind of not get into the weeds, but just tell more of the story that I wanted to tell, that I was intentionally holding myself back from when I was thinking about a pamphlet. So it was kind of freeing too, because I was like, okay, we can do a lot more stuff then if I have as many pages as I want to talk about. So it was both, because then I was like, oh, it's going to take like so much more time. Let me look at my trial schedule really quick.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
And luckily you're not on a timer, right? So this is a situation where this is going to come out when it comes out, which gives you a little bit of space. But so now we've made that decision. We start going down this path. When do you know you're cooking with gas? So when do you know you've made the right choice? I'm glad I did this. I'm glad I didn't stop at the pamphlet. I'm glad I didn't throw the whole damn thing away. Where in this process did you go, oh shit, this is really something?
Probably when I ran it for the first time.
Oh yeah.
And it was near kind of the end of developing it. Some things weren't fully there, and the playtest helped get them there. But when people were coming down the elevator and I give them their brief of what they're there to do, and they get down there and they start making decisions to investigate the murder, I was like, oh, yay. But then they start making decisions to deal with the strike.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, yes, because you don't have to solve the murder in Picket Line Tango.
Right.
And if you don't, stuff is still going to happen.
And that's not why you're there.
Right. And to see players struggle with that I was like, oh yes, it's working. It's working. So I while we weren't doing like all the murder mystery things, interviewing everyone, maybe we were having discussions about, okay, but like, we're not here to do this. Like, why are we doing this? We should just take the leader and just take her with us. And we should just like blow up the elevator. Like, why are we engaging with it? So it made it feel really alive.
Yeah.
And that's what I sometimes feel when I play games, even though I know like someone's making it up off the top of their head, like the game still feels alive. And that's like magic. I don't understand how it happens. Like, you fill in the blanks yourself, but I could tell that they were feeling that. And I was like, cool, they're making up their own, they're filling in the blanks themselves, which is beautiful. That's what I want.
Well, and I think that is something that I identified about Mothership content very early, which was not all Mothership content does this, but my favorite Mothership content does this, which is something you said very early on, which is, I'm going to lay all this shit out. I'm going to set the scene, and there's a ton of shit going on here. And then I'm done.
Exactly.
Now the rest is you. Right. And I'm going to make sure that my GM has what they need to stay with the players. Right. So I'm going to give them all the tools they need to lay the track just barely in front of the train as it's going. And when it turns, I'm going to give them the tools to be able to follow it there. But it's not going to be a Pathfinder 7 module story. Right. It's not going to be a D&D 150 page campaign where there's a start, middle, and end. But what you just said is something that's really been blowing my mind over the last couple of years, Emily, is we come up with the story, whether we want to or not, which means we don't need it to be made for us. We are by the sheer nature of our DNA. I don't know what the hell it is, but like our ability to piece everything together and to make a story and create arcs, it just frickin' happens, which is incredible. So how many times have you run this now, roughly?
Oh my gosh. Actually, not that many. Like probably like 4.
Okay.
Or 5.
Think about those 4 sessions for me for a second. What can you tell me a moment where you really were surprised? When did something happen in the world you created that when you added the agents of chaos, which are players, where they really surprised the hell out of you?
I had a group who figured it out almost by accident.
Interesting.
And I mean that Lucas the android was the true killer. At this point, only like 3 or 4 people had died. But because of the effects of those people dying to the colony, things were pretty dire. I think the bubble was decompressing. I think there were like children in the streets throwing rocks at people. And I also think there was an explosion in the mine. Those like the 3 worst people to died. So they go into the tavern because the pianist had just died, and they start talking to the bartender. But 2 of them, because so much is happening, leave one of their characters with the bartender. And if you talk to the bartender by yourself, he tries to get you to kill people. And that's what happened. And so I like private messaged this person, and I was like, okay, so it feels right to kill your teammate. And I was just like, I'm just going to say that to them. And I don't know if they've read it or not. And I'll let it go because, it is what it is. And so
stop here for a second, because this is something that I've been thinking about after reading it, right? Like, there's a wide range of ways a player can digest what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Were you ready for them to ignore it? Were you ready for them never to have seen the private message?
Yes, because at this point we've been playing for about the amount of time I think the session was going to last.
Right.
So I was like, okay, if they don't, that's fine. We can just wrap up.
Yep.
And we can either play again or I can figure out a way to wrap this up. So much chaos is going on. It's fine.
What did they do?
They attacked their teammate.
Interesting.
The teammate was like, oh, okay. And disarmed them. There was a bit of a fight. That's what triggered them to say, hold on, this bartender. And they figured out it was the bartender. But what they did was they took him prisoner, which neutralized him. But they also decided to take all of the alcohol and put it in the elevator with them and escape with it, thinking that he had poisoned it.
Right.
So that's what made everybody crazy, obviously. They nearly died getting to the elevator, and they nearly died at the end of the elevator because their company was angry at them. But they solved the issue. They just didn't get, they just were like, okay, he's poisoning the alcohol. We solved it. And I was like, good job.
So
kind of.
I want to give you a hypothetical, which is you and I are walking to go grab a sandwich, and we're walking down the street and we're chatting, and somebody out of nowhere interrupts us and says, hey, wait a second. Are you Emily Weiss? Are you the one that wrote Picket Line Tango? Which of course you say, yes, I am. What's the next thing they could say to you that would tell you, you know what? I made something pretty freaking good. What could they tell you at that moment that would make you, when we later sat down to eat the sandwich, you could turn to me and say, damn it, Craig, I think Picket Line Tango is a big deal. What could they tell you?
They could tell me that Hieronymus destroyed the colony. I've heard a lot of stories.
Let's give the listeners context. Why would that matter?
Hieronymus is the pet bear of one of the NPCs. He lives in a gilded cage. I hear so many stories about Hieronymus, but he's also like not everyone's going to encounter him. So there is a point where you will, which is when the person who has him in the cage dies. He will escape. But it's possible that you have no clue why there's a bear running around in a colony, literally killing in the streets.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a nightmare scenario out of a dream. So I've had a lot of people come up and say, we love Hieronymus.
Oh, that's so cool.
So if there's a Hieronymus reference, I'll be extremely happy.
That's your own little secret Easter egg, yes, right? That's in there.
He's so good. There was originally a different effect for that character, and it wasn't very interesting. And I was trying to think of a different effect, and I don't know what happened. Like out of the blue, I don't know how I came up with this, but I was like, what if there's just a bear?
Well, that leads, and this might answer the question, it leads to something that I always find interesting. When I talk to creators, they often say, I'm never done, but at some point you got to stop, right? But what I often hear is that there was something that happened at the very end, something that was added or something that was taken away that made it all come together and told you, okay, I think it's ready. I think we're done. And what was that for Picket Line Tango? Was there something towards the end that just made it all come together?
Yeah, there were two things, okay. I think. The major hump was making the strike more viable. But the final two things that kind of made that come together were the timeline of events. So the strike would still devolve with or without murders happening. And the factions in the strike itself. So that really made the strike real and something that if players decided to go that way, there was plenty of stuff for them to do. So it also tied the whole community together and gave the warden a lot of context about who the three leaders of the factions were and what their points of view were and how to run those NPCs. So players, if they were in the middle of investigating the murder, they could have a conversation with one of those NPCs about like, why are we striking? And it would just make everything a lot more cohesive. So that plus the timeline were like the two finishing touches that made everything make sense finally.
This is the part of many podcasts where someone comes on, interrupts the show, and explains that you should consider paying for the content that you're listening to right now for free. That pitchman explains by giving $1 or more a month, you not only support the show, but you allow the show to grow and improve. Here on the third floor, we refuse to interrupt your episode of Tabletop Talk with such time-wasting pleas. We pledge never to run a spot asking you to go to patreon.com and give $1 or more a month because supporting content creators keeps the content coming, even if there is a link in the show's description. And there is. We don't ask you to click it and become a patron. We don't waste time rambling about the benefits like early access to episodes, getting episodes without ad breaks like this, or even getting a chance to play in one of Craig's RPG sessions. Anyway, enjoy this episode knowing Tabletop Talk, despite being supported by its patrons, won't engage in such blatant appeals for support. So I want to shift gears a little bit here, and I want to talk about. So I've got it in my head how this happens. You tell me if I'm right.
Okay.
Ian calls you up and says, I need you to create something for me. I want to talk about the day that breach of contract starts to come together. So I'm going to read the blurb about breach of contract. I want you to think about that moment. So here's the blurb on breach of contract, which I had, and maybe this is tied to me like wanting to be a lawyer at one point in my life, but like I flipped through this thing when I got my Kickstarter and I'm like, oh shit, this is some really good stuff in here. And it's one, there's a lot of really hidden meat. Like there's just a lot of meat in these contracts. But anyway, let me read off. Let's slip the dogs of corporate oppression with this complete guide to interstellar contract law, featuring immersive tearaway contract handouts to enhance your game with legal and economic horrors. Breach of Contract is the definitive authority on dystopian corporate law for the Mothership sci-fi horror RPG. This book teaches you how to think, act, and negotiate like a mega corporation, helping you realize that the company's influence over your campaign world and establishing a tangible and ruthless presence in the PC's lives. It's a theme that drew me to good Mothership from the beginning, which is this. It's the same thing in Alien, right? Like Alien, it's the hidden horror in Alien is with the corporate. It's the hidden horror in Blade Runner too, right? Is that whole concept. And it was such an interesting delivery, but this didn't happen on its own. You made it. So was this brewing and then Ian poked you, or did Ian poke you and you started to brew it? Like, where does this come from?
¿Por qué no las dos? The first thing I ever wrote for Mothership was a contract.
And why? Why is that?
I saw someone on the Discord say, wouldn't it be cool if, on the Mothership Discord, if there was like a legal horror? Has anyone done that? And I was like, ooh.
Hello. Allow me to introduce myself.
Hello. I am lawyer. So I wrote a salvage contract for Mothership, and I had so much fun just taking apart an actual contract for salvage and making it unfair.
Oh, that's
making
amazing.
It sci-fi. It wasn't very like in depth. It wasn't very long. And I just posted it as like a Google Doc on the Discord server. And I was like, here you go. I did it. And people were like, oh, that's cool. And I never heard like anyone talk about using it or anything like that. But when Hull Breach was getting developed, And I was already someone that Ian had asked to write for it. We were talking about like what the products were going to be and what the tiers of the Kickstarter were going to be. And so he was like, I feel like I need another book for like a higher tier. And I was like, okay, contracts, because people like legal horror. I think that would be good. And so I don't know if it was like truly fleshed out at that point.
Sure.
But we were like, okay, we could do a contract book or a book about with like a few contracts that people can just hand to their players. Like it was conceived as like a supplement that's like handouts.
Right.
Not as fleshed out as it actually turned out to be. So that was it.
1-page adventures, which is exactly what it freaking is.
Yeah. My conception was it's something to supplement your game.
Right.
So like, let's say you have an adventure where someone needs like a bounty hunter and you want like a posting. Well, here's the contract you can hand them. That's what I conceived of for it. And I had only thought of like maybe 4 or 5 contracts to put in this, and like eventually became 6 and eventually became 8. So yeah, things just.
Well, so when in the process of making this, because what you originally said is what I expected. So when I got it, I was like, oh, cool. You know, this will be a neat, and the analogy, and this is not a great one, but the analogy I think of is like, the campaigns in Call of Cthulhu, right? Like one of the classic things that a keeper does in Call of Cthulhu is says, you know, you find this article, you find this, you know, and you give something tangible to your players.
Right.
And that's kind of what I was thinking this was going to be until I started reading them. And I was like, oh, Jesus, this is not what I thought it was going to be in a good way. When did that change? Right. So this original concept was my expectation as a Kickstarter backer. It's not what I got. And I was pleasantly surprised, but it was your original idea too. When did it become something else?
When I looked at them, I had written them much differently, much less interactively.
Mm-hmm.
And when it came to looking at tying it into Whole Breach, they needed to be more substantial. They needed to have their own staying power, but they also kind of needed to be not so dense that you could just hand them to somebody and they would spend 20 minutes in the weeds.
Right.
Which is kind of what happened when I started to play test them.
Yeah.
Is I would give them to people and people would just sit there in silence reading, which I understand, but isn't a ton of fun for people who are maybe not reading it.
Right.
So again, they just needed more context. So eventually we started thinking more about like what kinds of things would work best with Whole Breach, but also what would be interesting and useful in Mothership generally. So like one that I always had was the salvage one, but it is vastly different than the first one that I wrote.
So let's use that as the example for people listening, right? So it starts off as a generic salvage contract. What does it become and how does it get there?
So when I originally wrote the first one just for free to post, I took a template of a salvage contract because I'm not a contract attorney. If you're not an attorney, you won't know this, but if you are an attorney, you will know this. Law is extremely specialized.
But what was it? 1L or 2L that you cover? Was it torts or I'm trying to think of where contracts
it's
are.
One. It was 1 for me.
Yeah.
So at this point, I hadn't had that class in like 4 years. I'd passed the bar, which meant I studied it.
Right.
And that was it.
You knew it long enough, as they say.
Exactly. At that point, it was deleted.
Yep.
Like, I don't need that information anymore. Anyway, law is highly specialized. If you're not working in that area, you can safely say that a wills and estates attorney is not going to know what the heck what a felony or a misdemeanor, like what that's going to do for you. Okay. And vice versa. So I didn't know anything about maritime law. Obviously, I went online, I found a template for a salvage contract, and I started looking at it and looking at the structure and changing things myself to just make it more sci-fi, make it more
gameable.
Yeah. And that is essentially, that contract has a lot to do about naming parties and about naming what the salvage itself is. And that's it. So that's not very gameable. You're just writing down your name and like you have some fun little legalese, but that's not a game.
Well, and it doesn't fuck anybody, right? No. It's not oppressive.
Yeah. I mean, the one I made was a little bit because I think I was like, if you don't turn it in within 1,000,000 miles of this, we're gonna hit you with a huge fine based on how far away it is. And obviously 1,000,000 miles is nothing when we're talking about space. And someone commented and it was like, is this a typo? And I'm like, no, it's evil. It's evil.
So you pull this Google Doc back out and it's going to become something else. What drives you to make it something else and what does it become?
It needed to be fun to use. And it needed to be something that you cared about when you were doing the action of salvage. And the biggest touchstone I can think of is like that part of, I think it's Aliens, where they go in and they find people that are alive. And they're like, ah, man, that's our salvage. Sorry, guys. Like, we can't. Space law. We can't do it. So that was actually one of them that I made, like a criteria that you needed to select. So I was thinking about what you wanted to be thinking about when you're salvaging something. And the closest document that I could think of that was similar or that I thought would be fun was like a customs declaration.
Ooh.
So I looked at a bunch of customs declarations and thought about like, you're supposed to kind of declare like what goods you have, and what they are. So that's kind of what my inspiration came from, was figure out what you're salvaging. And then you need to tell us some things about that salvage before we pay you for it. Because if you don't tell us, no, we're not paying you. And part of it was thinking about why does the corporation care about that information? And what's fun to do and lie about. So it was both of those things, thinking about, well, if there's no one alive, hint, hint, like we could have the last one. But also
no one will contradict us.
Yeah. And also like we have to prove that it's not this corporation stuff. So let's like maybe spray paint over that logo. Or, pick something else.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
That's kind of the development process for that one.
So I'm going to, this didn't happen, tell me, but I'm imagining at some point you handed something over to Ian. He came back and he told you something a little tough. But he was right. Can you take me to that moment?
Which one?
Pick one for me.
Like all of them. I think one that stands out in my mind was I had written, gosh, you told me to pick just one or so many to think about.
Well, I'm going to help you narrow it down. What's the one you fought the most until you realized he was right?
There's a section in the book that I wrote that is not in the book, that we had to cut entirely. And it is in the first section that details like the legal system itself. That went through so much development that took months to do.
Wow.
Just because it was difficult to figure out like what I needed to write for that, because I can't ever write anything easy. That's what I said a lot during this. I was like, why couldn't I just write like some monster and a freaking ship? Like, God,
And it
I gotta
plants
make
its
things so
eggs
hard.
in you.
I gotta make so hard for myself. Like, it's the same thing with escape clause. I was like, this is so complicated. I don't know why I did this to myself.
That's so funny.
But it was on jurisdiction. And I'm sure you know, jurisdiction is really important in real life. Yeah. It depends on where you are, because that depends on what law is going to apply to you. That depends what court has power over you.
Yep.
And jurisdiction on Earth is really easy to figure out because there's land.
There's borders. There's governments.
Stand on the land.
Yeah.
In space, it's a freaking nightmare. Not just because of 3D space, but also because of distance. And I had this super complicated, like overly precious flowchart type thing of like who's going to have jurisdiction over a ship that breaches a contract, like who goes and gets them and all this stuff. And Ian was like, this does not matter to anything.
No, Ian. In fact, it's the most important thing.
What do you mean? You told me to write something like this. Like, what are you talking
that's
about?
Funny.
Yeah. So I was like, I don't get it. This is the backbone of our system.
Yeah.
And I don't see how I could write an entire space legal system and not have something about jurisdiction in it. And he was like, it's not real, Emily. And I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. It's not real.
And is that what it took to get you off that meat wagon? Yeah.
But also because another really good point is like, jurisdiction is not important to any of the contracts that we made.
Right.
And it wasn't important to that point of their development at all.
Yep.
And it was just kind of something that I had added because it felt necessary to me as an attorney to talk about jurisdiction, because that's normally the first question you ask in any type of fact pattern or legal issue is jurisdiction. Like,
well, and I'm imagining, and tell me if I'm right here, Emily, is like, it's meaty, right? Like that's untouched. Like we can dig into this and really like, this is a puzzle, an incredible puzzle.
We know
how you like those. Yeah.
And it's not, but unfortunately there's no good solution to that. Right. The better solution was to think about what the contracts needed to make them rounded. And the other thing I thought of was time. And so that's why the section on time is so prominent, is because all of the contracts need a standard of when things are due and when your obligations are important to the company. So that's why we have a section on that. And especially when you're talking with space and like faster than light travel and all these relative things, time is really important. And that was like kind of a really interesting part for me to write, because it's sort of a way of doing jurisdiction.
I was just going to say that. Yep.
But it's space jurisdiction, because otherwise it doesn't work. It
establishes its own jurisdiction in the process of defining time. Right, by the sheer nature. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So guys, we're going to take one more break. And when we get back from this break, we're going to get to one of my favorite segments. We're going to find out what Emily's been grooving on. We've been talking to Emily for an hour and 20 minutes. I'm telling you right now, after spending an hour and 20 minutes with Emily, I could talk to her about what we're grooving on together, probably for another 7 hours, but we're not going to do that to you. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to find out what's been, what got its hooks into her. We'll be right back. Attention all floor heads, gather round. I have a quest for you. You can simultaneously show your love for the show and embark on rewarding adventures. Head over to drivethrurpg.com, your one-stop shop for all things gaming. Whether you're looking for rulebooks, maps, art, or epic tales to enhance your gaming experience, it is that one-stop shop. Now, in the show notes, there's a unique affiliate link. Every one of your purchases directly supports Tabletop Talk if you use that link. It's like casting a powerful spell that helps us keep the podcast going strong. So next time you're itching for a new adventure, follow the affiliate link in our show notes or bookmark it now in your browser. It can be your portal to everything on DriveThruRPG. Now let's get back to the show, but please support the show by using that DriveThruRPG affiliate link next time you are shopping at the site. So this used to be a throwaway thing that would come up in some interviews and not in other interviews. And listener feedback was just like, hey, Craig, like, it's really cool when you guys like talk about what you like. And I realized it's actually very insightful. When you're somebody who makes something, especially somebody who has time constraints, right? I have a full-time job. I create a podcast and actual plays and a channel. So my time to consume is limited to much like yours is, right? So we have to be very discerning. We quickly go, nope, not for me, put it down, right? Like my wife, when she reads the first 15 pages of the book, she'll hate read the rest of it, even if she doesn't like it. I can't do that, right? Because I just don't have that kind of time. So what is something recently, and I don't mean recently necessarily by time, but something that's stuck with you, right? Is there any books, video games, movies, prestige TV, anything that has gotten its hooks into you recently that won't let go?
Maybe this is because we were talking about Cure earlier, but I watched Pulse, which is another movie by that same director.
Yeah, I've not seen it.
And I watched it like in the Halloween season. I try and watch like 31 movies every October.
Very nice.
So I watched it this October, and it's not as scary as Cure, but damn close.
Wait a second. Remind me, Paul. I might have watched this. Remind me the top line on Pulse. What is it? Is it the one where they watch the videos and they get infected by the internet?
Kind of, yes.
Right, and they see the room, right?
Yes.
When oh my God, I did watch this movie. Okay, keep going. I did watch this. Okay, go. Okay,
I watched it like through my fingers. The entire time I was terrified. Just the way the shots are so slow.
That's exactly
and just stay with a dark corner, and you just keep looking at the dark corner. You're like, oh God, what's in there? The dark corner. What's there? Oh God, I can't look away.
But he does an incredible job of conditioning you to that, right? Because there'll be somebody walking away from a building during that movie. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss the person who jumped off the top of that building and landed on the sidewalk, because there's no music cue. There's no like zoom in on that. It is just this thing that happens deep in the background early in the movie that you're like, what the fuck is going on right now? Because like the director did not make a big deal about the fact that like that just happened, and he conditions you to look everywhere. And then he has the gall to take his time. I
know.
And it's excruciating.
It's so scary.
Yeah.
There's a part where one of the main characters, she notices that the camera on the computer screen that she's looking at is coming from her closet. And she like turns around and starts walking towards it. And I was like, that's insane, ma'am. Leave the house. But you can't look away. It's like a car accident.
And it's my understanding there was an American remake that I've been told like do not watch.
I have not heard of that, but thankfully
that is not what I watched. Because it is something very distinctly J-horror. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure you can do that in an American style. I think there's a certain stylistic thing to J-horror that allows that movie to work.
I think so too. Yeah. It's just allowed to be understated.
Yep.
And I don't think that American horror really is that vibe, which is fine.
Exactly. It's different, right? It's just a different way to make movies.
It's just not very scary to me, but that's fine too. I can enjoy. I obviously love horror movies.
Right. And it doesn't have, I'm the same way. It doesn't have to scare me. No, It doesn't have to scare me. So now my question for you is have you gotten into any Korean horror?
I watched a Korean horror movie this past October too, but I didn't love it.
What, do you remember what it was?
Let me check. The Uninvited.
Not my favorite.
Yeah.
It's not
a
bad.
little too slow.
Yeah, it's not bad.
But the wailing, though.
That's where I was going.
But the wailing, though. I watched that a while ago, like several years ago. But that movie is great. It's just so artistic and creepy.
Oh.
And weird, especially at the end.
Yes.
I like when things are weird. That's
what the wailing does is something that doesn't happen to me very often. And it's a movie. People who listen to this podcast goes, oh, Craig is setting up to talk about the wailing, because I've talked about the wailing with a lot of people. Because I think the wailing is a very important movie. I really do. And what the wailing does is it gave me a feeling that I don't get very often. And I search for it. And that is I'm not sure what I just watched. I don't even know if I liked what I just watched. So I'm going to sit and watch it again right now. And that's exactly what happened. It's like I watched that movie back to back. And the second time, it wasn't the same movie.
It's funny you say that, because it's almost exactly what happened to me.
Yeah.
I rewatched movies, like, I usually go like several months at least between rewatching stuff. Yep. And it's only stuff I really, really love. But The Wailing, I think I watched one night, and then the next night I got a friend of mine. I was like, you have to watch this with me.
You got to watch this. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something about that movie. And I think that, if I were making a living at dissecting horror, I could probably get into it. It scratched a lot of itches for me. We talk about pace, right? It's got a really interesting pace. So it has a little bit of that J-horror pace, not quite the same, but it everything's allowed to breathe.
Exactly.
I'm finding, because it sent me down a whole rabbit hole of Korean horror. They're not afraid to fucking lean in and show you some effed up stuff, man. Yeah. Like they will. Woo. And The Wailing does a good job of going, okay, normal stuff. Dad's kind of a loser, kind of dippy do, but he loves his kids. So, oh my God, there's blood everywhere.
Exactly. Oh, it's that kind of movie.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, really good. And at the end, you think you have a pretty good idea of what you just watched, but some stuff doesn't make sense. And then you go back and watch it again and goes, oh my God, it all makes sense.
Yeah. It's really good.
Yeah.
But there's still some like cultural things that you're like, I'm just totally fine not knowing what that is.
Yeah.
That's cool anyway.
I didn't feel with foreign eyes that I missed anything, but I would imagine that without, as a national, I bet there was stuff that I definitely didn't catch.
Yeah.
Plus it's just one of my favorite genres in horror, which is folk horror. I think folk horror is so interesting.
Yeah.
And I think this is without a question in my mind, a folk horror.
It is
movie.
For sure. Speaking of effed up stuff in movies, I just thought of this one that I watched a few months ago. It's called Mad God.
I've not seen this.
And it's a stop motion animation film that took like an unbelievable amount of time to make. It's pretty short. And I cannot tell you what it's about, but I can tell you it's got the most effed up shit I've ever seen. Think of the nastiest thing you can think of. It's in there.
Wow.
But it's really good. I just don't.
Why though? So I mean, just like Human Centipede's got some fucked up shit in it, and it's not good. But this has got fucked up shit and it is good. What's the difference? It's good
because it's strange.
Okay.
I don't think Human Centipede is that. I mean, it's strange in that no one's done it before.
It's all shock. It's just all shock.
Yeah. And this has a non-zero amount of shock, but it's
its shock is greater than one.
It is so weird that you just like, what is that? What does that mean?
Cool. Yeah.
Does it mean anything? Okay, we're moving. Oh, that's also, what is that? Huh? It's kind of like a trip, like a acid trip.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if the plot really makes any sense, but it's beautiful in a disgusting way. I really liked it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So here's a tricky question. We'll wrap things up here, which is, God, I love talking to people who love horror like I do. I warned you guys before the break. I could literally talk to Emily about the stuff for 7 hours.
Yeah.
What is your response movie when someone goes, I don't like horror? And you say, okay, but have you seen, like, do you have a go-to?
I try to see about that. Because I feel like there are movies that could be considered horror movies that aren't scary and just have
what do you think of when you say that?
Creepy vibes. Like Addams Family.
Okay.
And honestly, I would kind of say The Wailing too. Because The Wailing is just creepy.
Right.
And strange. What's another one? Check.
But I wouldn't show The Wailing to somebody who says they don't like horror.
I would.
Interesting. And how would you set that up?
I would say it's a creepy fairy tale.
Okay. Fair.
And it's like a modern, magical, realist, creepy fairy tale.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would show them probably something that, like, let's see. Think about this for a second. Some older horror movies I would think of.
That's where I go to.
And maybe not horror itself, like adjacent, like Hound of the Baskervilles.
Ooh, good call.
The one with Peter Cushing and
yes.
Christopher Lee. Like, that movie is so
phenomenal.
Nice. It's just really comforting.
Yep. And it's not the book. But I'm fine with both of them existing at the same time. They're both wonderful. Yep.
I also really like, but it's a little scary, but it's so, just like well put together and just beautiful. Suspiria.
Oh God. That's a goddamn movie right there.
The vibes.
Oh, it's a movie.
Such good vibes.
Yeah, you are far more daring than I am because like I don't know if I would recommend Suspiria to every horror fan I met. I think it takes a certain person, not good or bad person, but like not everybody's going to groove on it, right? Like Suspiria, nobody says, yeah, I think Suspiria is fine. Nobody's ever said that sentence, right? Everybody has said it is pure garbage or it is one of the greatest horror movies ever made. It's a little bit like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Nobody goes, yeah, it's fine. Like either you're like, that's garbage or
it's great.
It could be the greatest horror movie ever made. And that's kind of where I am. That it could be the greatest ever made, but it's just, look at you. You're ballsy with the Suspiria. I like it.
I just thought of another one.
Okay.
That's a little bit more palatable. Like I like to give people weird recommendations because when I ask for people to give me recommendations, like I want their deep weird ones because that tells me a lot about them.
Yes.
If they think that I would like that. And so I'm like, hey, this is like the best one I've seen. And it's not gonna scare you. It's just gonna be creepy and fun and have great music in it. Gaslight.
Is that the original black and white where the term came from? Can you believe I heard about this movie because the term, right? And how gaslighting became a thing. So I've read about this movie. I've never watched the movie.
Really?
And I've never been told if it's good or not.
Oh my gosh. It's really good. It has Angela Lansbury and Ingrid Bergman in it. Like my two favorite actresses.
I love them in a very inappropriate way.
I mean, you're not alone.
Yeah. They're both amazing.
It's basically, I mean, there's a reason the term came from this movie.
Yeah.
It's about a woman who gets married to someone that she thinks is like really great and eventually starts to think that she's losing her mind. And it's creepy and it has a mystery to it. and it has a kind of like a true crime element to it. So like if I like a lot of my women friends who are not really into horror, I would start to recommend them things that are like
I'm
more
gonna have to
noir.
watch this because I could see this as being a good one to keep in my holster.
This movie's great. It's I haven't seen it in quite some time, but it's just like nice and comforting is weird to say about it. But it is just a really nice story and creepy and spooky, but not like aggressive or harsh. Like a lot of, I think horror people who are not into horror, I think of movies that are like maybe the Hereditaries, maybe the like Psycho a little bit, and are not about like just violence in your face all the time. And this is not that. This is like more psychological and less in your face about it.
People who don't love horror think of jump scares, and that's what horror is, right? And jump scares is a very tiny ingredient. And people who proclaim themselves as horror fans, I never hear them say it's because of jump scares. That's why I love horror, right? So, but that's the perception of it from the outside. Boy, Emily, there's a lot of really cool things to do on a Sunday night, especially when you're getting ready to, head off and defend the constitutional rights of people the next morning. And
it's fine. I don't have court tomorrow. We're good.
Oh, good. It doesn't involve talking to me, so I do appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, no problem. It was fun. I got to talk about a bunch of horror movies. That was great.
That's always
and
good.
Myself. Like my two favorite things.
And everybody listening, you know the routine. Everything we've talked about, both the things that Emily's created are linked below, as well as the things that we've talked about that neither of us have created are also linked below, so that you can follow along and look at what we've been talking about. Most importantly, though, this is the end. You listen to the whole thing, and I appreciate you doing that. Take care. A big thank you to you, Emily, for joining me today. You can learn more about their work on Ian Musum's site, anodyneprintwear.com. The link is in the show notes. What horror movie would you recommend to somebody who doesn't like horror? I'm dying to hear your thoughts. Let me know on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky, or drop me a line at admin@thirdfloorwars.com. And don't worry, all of those links are in the show notes as well. Please take a minute to rate, review, and share this podcast. Word of mouth is the key to growing Tabletop Talk, the podcast. Make sure you catch the next episode. It's a conversation with Ben Alexander about their art for parable games and their newest game, Ironheart. Happy gaming, friend. Remember what Ursula Le Guin once said, the creative adult is the child who survived. Let that child create. Emily is a writer, game designer, and a real-world public defense attorney who uses her harrowing experiences with the criminal justice system to inform. How'd that feel? Okay?
I felt good.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. You were excellent. That was an excellent
Sweet.
site. Yep.
Cool.
That's exactly what I love doing. So.
Yeah. The lawyer signposting helps.
Yeah. For me, because again, the goal is for us to understand not what you make, but how you make it, right? And why you make it. And I find that origin story can be very revealing as far as like it's the prequel.
Right.
Right. Exactly. To this next segment, if that makes any sense. Okay. I'll bring us back. Oh man, fuck you, Ian, for being right. This has been a great interview.
He's right a lot, which is really annoying.
It's really fucking annoying, isn't it? So the idea here is kind of what we've done a little bit, like kind of what we did when we were talking about horror movies. Kind of what's happening here. Just want to understand what you consume as someone who creates. What do you consume? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, bring us back. Hey, are you still here? Look, the podcast is over. And you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast too while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.